It all started when I noticed a strange shift in Rachel's demeanor. She'd always been glued to her phone, but now, it was different. She'd smile slyly at the screen, tilted away when I walked by, and practically jump if I got too close. At first, I chalked it up to work stress or maybe her newfound obsession with Instagram. She'd been posting more often lately, pictures of herself at the gym, by the pool, in outfits that left little to the imagination. I didn't think much of it until one day when I glanced over her shoulder and saw a flurry of notifications from names I didn't recognize. My stomach sank, but I brushed it off. It's probably just her followers, I told myself. She's getting popular. That excuse worked until last Friday. We were lounging on the couch when Rachel left to grab a drink. Her phone buzzed next to me, the screen lighting up. I wasn't snooping, I swear. But one message stood out among the others. Can't wait to see you tonight, Redheart. The room seemed to close in on me. I froze, the words searing into my mind. When Rachel returned, I casually asked, "Any big plans tomorrow?" Her answer? Work. That was a lie. The next day, I found out why. The night after I saw that message on Rachel's phone, I couldn't sleep. The phrase, "Can't wait to see you tonight," played on a loop in my head, each repetition stabbing deeper than the last. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a joke, or even spam. But deep down, I knew better. Rachel fell asleep easily, her phone resting on the nightstand. She looked peaceful, her breathing soft and even. I stared at her, a lump forming in my throat. Could she really be hiding something? I didn't want to do it, but the compulsion was stronger than my principles. When I was sure she was deep asleep, I carefully reached over and grabbed her phone. My hands trembled as I entered the passcode, the familiar numbers clicking into place. At first, everything seemed normal. I opened her texts, flipping through the usual conversations with friends and family. Nothing stood out. But then I remembered Instagram. She'd been obsessed with it lately, constantly posting selfies and motivational captions about fitness and lifestyle. That's where I'd seen the notifications before. I opened the app and went straight to her DMs. Her inbox was flooded with messages from fans and followers. Most were harmless compliments. "You're gorgeous!" "Inspiration!" "Your workouts changed my life!" It was the kind of validation she thrived on. But as I scrolled further, I found the name that made my blood run cold, Aaron. Aaron wasn't just another fan. His messages stood out immediately, not just for their frequency but for their tone. Flirty, intimate, and increasingly explicit. My stomach churned as I read through the chat history. "Last night was amazing," Aaron had written a week ago. "I can't stop thinking about the way you looked in that dress, and out of it." Her response came quickly. "You have no idea how hard it was to leave. Wish I could have stayed the night." It got worse. Aaron had sent a picture, a shirtless selfie taken in a dimly lit room, his muscles flexing. Rachel replied with a photo of her own. It wasn't full-on explicit, but it might as well have been. She was in lingerie I'd never seen before, her body posed provocatively in front of a mirror. My breath caught in my throat. This was real. This wasn't a joke or a misunderstanding. Rachel, my wife, was sexting another man. I wanted to stop reading, but I couldn't. It was like a car crash I couldn't look away from. Each message peeled back another layer of betrayal, exposing the depth of their affair. "How's your day looking?" Aaron had asked earlier that week. "Same old," Rachel replied. "He's working late tomorrow. I can come over after 8. My grip on the phone tightened. He. That was me. She didn't even bother using my name, just reduced me to an inconvenience she had to work around. Then came the messages that shattered any remaining doubt. "Aaron. Wish I could see you now." Rachel. "Soon, babe. I'll make it worth the wait." I put the phone down, my hands shaking. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. For years, I had trusted Rachel completely. We built a life together, a marriage, a home. And now, it all felt like a lie. I sat in the dark for hours, staring at nothing. Memories of us flashed through my mind, our wedding day, vacations, lazy Sundays spent binge-watching TV. How long had she been doing this? How long had I been blind to the truth? By the time the sun rose, I hadn't slept. Rachel woke up and stretched, yawning softly. She glanced at me and smiled, her face free of guilt or concern. "Morning, babe," she said, leaning in for a kiss. I forced myself to smile back. Inside, I was crumbling. The days that followed felt surreal, like I was living someone else's nightmare. I couldn't bring myself to confront Rachel, not yet. I needed time to process, to plan my next move. Every interaction with her felt like a performance, a charade I had to maintain. She laughed at my jokes, kissed me goodbye, and texted Aaron behind my back. But fate has a funny way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. It was a Tuesday evening, just as I was pulling into our driveway, when our neighbor, Mrs. Collins, flagged me down. Mrs. Collins was the quintessential nosy neighbor, always peering out her window, always up to date on everyone's business. Normally, her chatter annoyed me, but this time, she had a look on her face that made my stomach tighten. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," she began, lowering her voice. "But I saw something the other day that I think you should know about." I froze. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Collins glanced around, as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. "There was a man at your house last week. He came by in the afternoon while you were at work. I thought he might be a repairman, but well, he didn't stay long, and he left in a hurry when I stepped outside." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What did he look like?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tall, dark hair, maybe early 30s? He drove a black SUV. Aaron." I managed to thank her and walked into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. Rachel was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. The sight of her, so calm and carefree, made my blood boil. "How was your day?" I asked, forcing a smile. She looked up, startled. "Oh, you know, the usual." The lie slid out of her mouth so effortlessly that it almost made me doubt Mrs. Collins' story. Almost. I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, and walked into the living room. My mind was racing. She had brought him here, into our home. The thought made my skin crawl. This wasn't just a fling. She was comfortable enough with Aaron to let him into the place we shared, the place we had built together. I spent the rest of the evening playing along, acting like everything was fine. But inside I was fuming. I couldn't confront her, not yet. Not until I had all the facts. The next day, I started digging. Rachel had always been protective of her phone, but I knew her routine. She'd leave it charging in the kitchen while she showered every morning. It wasn't much, but it gave me a window of opportunity. That morning, as soon as I heard the water running, I grabbed her phone and unlocked it. My hands were steady this time. I wasn't afraid of what I might find. I already knew the truth, now I just needed confirmation. I went straight to her Instagram DMs, and there it was, more messages from Aaron. "Had a great time at your place last week," he'd written. "Your neighbor's a bit nosy though. Almost got caught, lol." Rachel had responded with a laughing emoji and, "Don't worry. She doesn't know anything. Can't wait to see you again." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as anger bubbled inside me. They thought it was funny, sneaking around, almost getting caught. They were treating my marriage like some kind of joke. I scrolled further back and found more evidence of their affair, plans to meet up, inside jokes, explicit photos. It wasn't just physical, they had an emotional connection too. That realization hurt more than anything else. When Rachel came downstairs, she was humming softly, her hair wrapped in a towel. She smiled at me as she poured herself a cup of coffee, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Big plans today?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Not really," she replied, sipping her coffee. "Just work stuff." Another lie. I smiled back, but my mind was already racing. If she thought she could keep this up without consequences, she was in for a rude awakening. She'd underestimated me. I couldn't shake that message. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words. Can't wait to see you tonight. It was burned into my brain. Rachel acted like nothing had changed, smiling at me over dinner, laughing at her favorite sitcoms, but all I could think was, who is she really laughing with when I'm not around? I couldn't let it go. I told myself I needed to know the truth, for my sanity, for my pride. So that night, after Rachel had fallen asleep, I gave in to my worst instincts. I grabbed her phone. I was sweating as I unlocked it. Her passcode hadn't changed. Her birthday, the one I'd spent years celebrating with her. My hands trembled as I opened her messages. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do. We used to have trust, or so I believed. But what I found? That trust was a joke. At first, everything seemed normal. Texts from her sister about their latest brunch plans, a few group chats with her friends, and some boring work emails. For a second I felt foolish, like I'd let my imagination run wild. Then I saw it, the Instagram app. She'd always been on Instagram a lot lately, more than usual. Posting workout selfies, food pics, even the occasional sultry photo. I used to think it was harmless. She's building her confidence, I told myself. But when I opened her DMs, I realized how naive I'd been. The first few messages were innocent enough, people commenting on her photos, followers asking for fitness tips. But as I scrolled, my chest tightened. There was a string of messages from strangers, their profiles littered with pictures of six-packs and gym selfies. Most of them were simple, heart emojis, compliments about her looks, stuff she didn't reply to. But then, one thread caught my eye. The username was something generic, FitAaron24. Aaron. I opened the conversation, and immediately, my stomach dropped. The messages were graphic, intimate, the kind of talk that left no room for doubt. I can't stop thinking about you, he'd written. Her reply? I've been counting down the days until I see you again. It was like a punch to the gut. My breath hitched as I kept reading, scrolling through their chat like a man possessed. They talked about meeting up, about sneaking around. Aaron said he loved the rush of knowing I had no idea. That wasn't even the worst of it. Buried between their messages were photos, Rachel in lingerie I'd never seen before, Rachel posed suggestively in our bedroom, Rachel smiling in a way that wasn't meant for me. My wife. The woman I'd spent years building a life with, laughing with, trusting. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. The room spun around me, and for a second, I thought I might throw up. When Rachel stirred in her sleep, I froze. I couldn't let her catch me, not yet. Slowly, I put the phone back on the nightstand and slipped out of the room. I sat in the dark living room for hours, replaying the messages in my head. Aaron wasn't just some random guy from her Instagram following, he was something more. But who was he? Where had she met him? When the sun started to rise, I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to be smart about this. So I waited. The next morning, Rachel acted like nothing had changed. She hummed while making coffee, kissed me goodbye, and left for work. I couldn't even look her in the eye. I wasn't just hurt, I was angry. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was betraying me. And worst of all, she didn't seem to feel the slightest bit of guilt. I didn't know how far this went or how long it had been going on, but I knew one thing for sure, I was going to find out. I tried to play it cool over the next few days, but it wasn't easy. Every time Rachel smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodbye, I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, shake her until she admitted everything. But I didn't. Instead, I bided my time, hoping the truth would reveal itself. And it did, just not in the way I expected. It was a sunny Thursday afternoon when Mrs. Collins, our elderly neighbor, waved me over. She was outside tending to her flower beds, her floppy hat shielding her from the sun. "Good afternoon, Mr. Jacobs," she chirped as I walked up. "You got a minute?" I hesitated. Mrs. Collins was sweet but notorious for her love of gossip. Normally, I avoided getting sucked into her stories, but something about her tone made me pause. "Sure, what's up?" I said, forcing a smile. She looked around, as if checking to make sure no one else could hear. Then, leaning in slightly, she lowered her voice. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I saw something the other day that didn't sit right with me." I frowned, a knot forming in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Collins hesitated, glancing toward my house. "There was a man here on Tuesday while you were at work. A young man. He parked down the street and walked up to your door like he owned the place. I thought maybe he was a friend of yours, but—" She trailed off, giving me a pointed look. "What did he look like?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "Tall, dark-haired, fit. Drove a black SUV," she said, her lips pursed. "He was only here for about an hour, but when he left, he looked, well, flustered." "Aaron." The blood drained from my face as her words sank in. I managed to thank her and quickly excused myself, walking back to the house in a daze. My hands were shaking as I opened the front door. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it were mocking me. Rachel was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She turned to smile at me when I walked in. "Hey, honey! How was your day?" Her voice grated against my nerves. I forced a smile, masking the storm raging inside me. "Same as always," I said. "How about you?" "Oh, you know," she said casually, not even looking up. "Work errands, the usual." She was lying. I knew it. My chest tightened as I stood there, watching her go about her evening like nothing had changed. The betrayal felt sharper now, more visceral. She'd brought Aaron into our home. Into my space. I couldn't let it go. But I couldn't confront her yet either. Not without more proof. So I waited. Over the next few days, I started watching Rachel more closely. I paid attention to her every move, every little excuse she made to leave the house. She thought she was so clever, slipping out with her phone in hand, texting furiously when she thought I wasn't looking. But I saw it all. And the more I watched, the angrier I became. This wasn't just some fling. This was deliberate. Calculated. Rachel had taken everything we'd built, our marriage, our home, and thrown it all away for him. But she'd underestimated me. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The pieces were falling into place, and I knew what I had to do. Confronting Rachel outright would only give her the chance to spin a story, to deny everything. No, if I was going to expose her, I needed irrefutable proof. I needed to catch her red-handed. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. On Monday morning, Rachel casually mentioned she had to work late that evening. "We've got this big project deadline," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "I might not be home until 9 or so." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "No problem. Want me to save you some dinner?" "That'd be great," she replied, smiling like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. As soon as she left, I set my plan in motion. I called in sick at work, something I'd never done before, and spent the day preparing. I checked the cameras I'd installed in the living room and hallway, making sure they were well hidden and working perfectly. If she brought Aaron to the house again, I'd have the evidence I needed. By 6 p.m., I was parked in my car down the street, far enough away that Rachel wouldn't see me when she returned. The hours ticked by slowly, each minute dragging as I sat there, watching our house like a hunter waiting for his prey. Then, just before 7, her car pulled into the driveway. I leaned forward, my heart pounding as I watched her step out, phone in hand. She glanced around briefly, as if checking for something, or someone. A moment later, a black SUV pulled up behind her. "Aaron." I gritted my teeth as he got out of the car, walking toward her with a smug grin on his face. They didn't even bother pretending to be subtle. Rachel reached up to kiss him, right there in the open, as if they hadn't a care in the world. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was what I needed. Proof. They disappeared inside, and I waited a full 5 minutes before making my move. Quietly, I slipped out of the car and approached the house. I'd left the back door unlocked earlier, knowing this moment would come. The house was eerily silent as I stepped inside, the faint sound of laughter filtering in from the living room. I crept closer, staying in the shadows, my blood boiling with every step. And then I saw them. They were on the couch, tangled together like teenagers, their whispers and laughter filling the air. Rachel's head was thrown back in a way I hadn't seen in years, her hands roaming over Aaron like he was some kind of prize. I pulled out my phone, recording every second. The video felt like a dagger in my heart, but I couldn't stop. This was the proof I needed, the ammunition that would bring their world crashing down. Finally, I stepped into the room. "Having fun?" The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Rachel froze, her eyes widening in horror as she turned to face me. Aaron scrambled to his feet, looking like a deer caught in headlights. What are you doing here?" Rachel stammered, her voice shaking. "I live here," I said coldly, my gaze shifting between them. "Remember?" Neither of them had an answer. They just stood there, their guilt written all over their faces. I held up my phone, letting them see the screen. "Smile. You're on camera." Rachel's face turned ashen, and Aaron took a step back, mumbling something incoherent. I didn't wait for an explanation. I turned and walked out, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This was just the beginning. I drove aimlessly for hours after leaving the house, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rachel's face, the shock, the guilt, the panic. I could hear Aaron's stammering voice, his pathetic attempt to come up with an excuse. They thought I'd just walk away, that I'd let them go on with their little affair while I licked my wounds in silence. But they didn't know me. By the time I pulled into a gas station, my rage had crystallized into something sharper, determination. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to destroy them. The next day, I called in sick again. I wasn't ready to face the world, not while my marriage, and my pride, lay in ruins. Instead, I spent the day gathering every scrap of evidence I had. The video was a start, but I needed more. I combed through Rachel's phone records, her emails, even her social media accounts. I felt dirty doing it, but I didn't care. She'd forfeited her right to privacy the moment she brought Aaron into our home. What I found was worse than I imagined. Their affair wasn't some fleeting fling, it had been going on for months. The emails were laced with flirtation, thinly veiled under the guise of work discussions. Her calendar was full of fabricated meetings and late-night work events that coincided perfectly with Aaron's free time. And then there were the photos. Dozens of them, hidden in a folder on her phone, each one more damning than the last. Rachel and Aaron at a hotel, at the gym, even in our backyard. My stomach churned as I flipped through them, each image driving the knife deeper into my chest. By the time I was done, I had everything I needed to take her down. That evening, Rachel came home late, as expected. She walked in like nothing had happened, flashing me a strained smile as she set her bag on the counter. "Hey," she said cautiously. "How was your day?" I didn't respond. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. "What?" she asked, forcing a laugh. "Did I do something?" The sheer audacity of her playing dumb was almost comical. "Almost." "No," I said finally, my voice cold. "But you will." Her smile faltered, but she didn't press. She went upstairs to shower, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed up, planning my next move. Rachel had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my sense of security. It was only fair that I returned the favor. When the sun rose, I had a plan. It was time to make her pay. The next few days felt like a balancing act. I had to keep up appearances, play the role of the oblivious husband while secretly building my case against Rachel. Every interaction with her was a strain, every smile and laugh felt fake. I could see the guilt flicker in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, but she didn't know I already had everything I needed. Then Mrs. Collins struck again. It was Saturday morning, and I was trimming the hedges when she shuffled over, a determined look on her face. "Good morning, Mr. Jacobs," she called. "Morning, Mrs. Collins," I replied, keeping my tone light. She looked around, ensuring we were alone, before stepping closer. "I didn't want to pry, but I thought you should know I saw that man again." My chest tightened. "When?" "Yesterday afternoon," she said. "He parked around the corner this time. Walked up to your back door like he was trying not to be seen." I clenched my jaw, the rage bubbling beneath the surface. "And you're sure it was the same guy?" "Oh, I'm certain," she said firmly. "Tall, dark-haired, fit. He was only here for about an hour, but—" She trailed off, her lips pursing in disapproval. "It didn't seem right." It didn't seem right? That was the understatement of the year. "Thank you, Mrs. Collins," I said, managing a tight smile. "I appreciate you letting me know." She patted my arm sympathetically. "I hope everything's okay, dear. You're such a nice young man. You deserve better." Her words stung more than they should have. I nodded and went back to the hedges, pretending to focus on the task while my mind spiraled. Rachel wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She'd turned our home into her personal playground, and Aaron was waltzing in and out like he belonged there. They thought they were untouchable. But they were wrong. I spent the rest of the day finalizing my plan. I had enough evidence to confront Rachel, but I wasn't just after the truth. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation and betrayal she'd inflicted on me. I wanted her to watch her perfect little world crumble beneath her feet. By the time Rachel came home that evening, I was ready. She walked in, humming softly to herself, her phone glued to her hand. "Hey, babe," she said, glancing at me briefly before heading toward the kitchen. I didn't respond. Instead, I waited, letting her get comfortable. She poured herself a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't a care in the world. "Rachel," I said finally, my voice cutting through the silence. She looked up, startled. "Yeah?" I held her gaze, letting the weight of my stare sink in. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, and for a split second, I saw the fear flash in her eyes. She knew. But she had no idea what was coming. Rachel set her wine glass down, her hand trembling slightly. "What's wrong?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed her. I stood up, taking my time, letting the tension build. "I've been noticing a lot of things lately," I began, my tone calm but firm. "Your late nights, the phone calls, the constant texting." Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not done," I said coldly. The silence was suffocating as I walked to the counter and picked up my phone. "You see, Rachel, I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation." I turned the screen toward her, hitting play on the video I'd taken just days before. Her face drained of color as she watched herself and Aaron on the couch, their laughter and touches replaying on the screen. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice sharp. She stammered, her words caught in her throat. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly. "Really? Then what is it, Rachel? Because it sure as hell looks like my wife screwing another man in my house." She started to cry, her hands covering her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It was a mistake, I swear. It didn't mean anything." "Oh, it didn't mean anything?" I snapped, the anger boiling over. "You've been sneaking around for months, lying to my face, and bringing him here. To our home. To our bed." Rachel fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please let me explain," she begged. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't want to hurt you." I stared down at her unmoved. "You didn't want to hurt me? Rachel, you didn't just hurt me. You shattered everything we had. Our trust, our marriage, gone." She crawled toward me, clutching at my legs. "I'll do anything to fix this," she cried. "Anything." I yanked my leg away, stepping back. "Don't touch me," I growled. "I'm not done yet." I pulled out a folder from the drawer, slapping it onto the counter. This is everything. Your texts, your emails, your little rendezvous at hotels. I have it all. Her sobs turned into gasps as she flipped through the pages. Her betrayal lay bare in black and white. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I continued, my voice icy. This marriage is over. You're going to lose everything, me, the house, even Aaron. Because do you think he's going to stick around when he realizes what a mess you are? Rachel screamed, slamming her fists against the floor. You can't do this, she shrieked. You can't just throw me away like this. I leaned in close, my voice low and venomous. You threw yourself away the moment you let him into our lives. Don't you dare blame me for your choices. The weight of my words hung in the air as I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the floor. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. This was only the beginning of her downfall. Rachel's sobs echoed through the house as I walked upstairs to our bedroom. My hands were shaking, not with sadness, not with regret, but with the adrenaline-fueled rage coursing through me. She thought her tears would fix this, that her apologies would undo months of betrayal. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, Rachel tried to act as if nothing had happened. She stayed quiet, avoiding me at all costs, her puffy eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. But I had no intention of letting her wallow in silence. While she moped around, I was already setting the next phase of my plan in motion. Our neighborhood thrived on gossip. People like Mrs. Collins, for example, loved to know everyone's business. And Rachel's business? It was about to become very public. I started with an anonymous email. It went out to a few key people in our community, neighbors, friends, even the HOA president. In it, I attached a handful of the damning screenshots I'd gathered, emails between Rachel and Aaron, photos of their hotel meetups, and, of course, the video I'd captured of them together. The email was simple. It's time you all knew the truth about Rachel Jacobs. She's not the person you think she is. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications. The group chats I was still part of, ones Rachel used to dominate with her sunny updates about yoga classes and dinner parties, were now filled with shocked reactions. Is this real? One neighbor asked. Oh my God, Rachel! Another chimed in. Even Mrs. Collins joined in, her typical restraint nowhere to be found. I knew something wasn't right. That man she had over, disgraceful. I watched the messages roll in, each one confirming that Rachel's carefully curated image was unraveling. By 3 p.m., Rachel's phone started buzzing. I sat in the living room, sipping coffee as she darted down the stairs, phone in hand, her face pale. What the hell did you do? She hissed, holding her phone out like it was evidence in a murder trial. I raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, she snapped, her voice rising. Everyone's seen it. My friends, my coworkers. Oh, you mean the emails? I interrupted, setting my cup down. The ones exposing you and Aaron? Yeah, I sent those. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. How could you? She whispered, tears streaming down her face. I stood, towering over her. How could I? I repeated. How could you? You made this bed, Rachel. Now you get to lie in it. She turned and ran upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. But her hiding wouldn't save her. Not from this. Later that evening, as I stood in the kitchen making dinner for myself, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Mrs. Collins standing there, a triumphant look on her face. Well, Mr. Jacobs, she said, crossing her arms. I guess the truth does come out eventually, doesn't it? I nodded, unable to suppress a bitter smile. It always does. She patted my shoulder, offering a few words of sympathy before heading back home. As the door closed behind her, I realized something. Rachel's world wasn't just crumbling. It was imploding, and I was the one lighting the match. The next morning, as Rachel sulked in the bedroom, the final piece of my plan was falling into place. Destroying her reputation was only part of the revenge. Aaron, the smug, arrogant man who had invaded my home, was next on my list. I still had the video. The same one that had shaken Rachel to her core. But it wasn't enough to keep it as leverage. I wanted him to feel the weight of his actions, to lose the smug confidence he carried every time he walked into my home like he belonged there. I started with a little research. Aaron wasn't hard to track down. His Instagram, packed with gym selfies and motivational quotes, proudly listed him as a personal trainer at a nearby fitness center. A few quick searches led me to the company's contact page, where I found the email address of his manager. Perfect. I drafted an email carefully, attaching the video along with a brief explanation. Asterisk. Dear manager's name. I think it's important you're aware of the behavior of your employee Aaron, last name. Enclosed is evidence of him engaging in an affair with my wife while on the clock. This occurred repeatedly at times when he was supposedly working. I'm not sure this reflects the professional image your gym wants to uphold. Asterisk. I clicked send, feeling a cold satisfaction as the email disappeared into the ether. By mid-afternoon, I had a reply. The manager thanked me for bringing the situation to their attention, promising to investigate further. But that wasn't enough for me. The next step was more public. I uploaded the video to a private server and sent it anonymously to several fitness influencers Aaron frequently collaborated with. I didn't need to say much, just a note hinting at his unprofessionalism and lack of integrity. The fallout was almost immediate. By the next day, Aaron's Instagram was flooded with comments. His followers, mostly women who admired his physique and charisma, weren't kind. Cheater! Is this how you treat your clients? Unfollowed. What a disappointment. When I checked his account later that evening, it had been deactivated. Rachel, of course, was oblivious to all of this. She spent most of her time in the bedroom, alternating between crying and trying to text me apologies I refused to read. But I wasn't done. That night, I drove to the gym where Aaron worked. It was after hours, the parking lot mostly empty except for a few cars. I waited in the shadows until I saw him step out, his shoulders slumped, his usual cocky swagger replaced with an air of defeat. He didn't see me coming until I was right in front of him. You look like you've had a rough day, I said, my voice calm but menacing. Aaron froze, his eyes widening as he recognized me. Listen, man. No, I interrupted, stepping closer. You listen. You thought you could screw my wife and get away with it? You thought I wouldn't find out? He stammered, backing away slightly. I didn't mean. I don't care what you meant. I growled, my voice sharp. You disrespected me. My home. My life. Aaron raised his hands, his voice trembling. Look, I'm sorry, all right? It was a mistake. It won't happen again. I laughed bitterly. You're right. It won't. Because your career? Your reputation? It's gone. Just like your access to her. He flinched, but I wasn't finished. Stay out of my life. Out of her life. If I ever see you near my house again. I leaned in close, lowering my voice to a whisper. You won't like what happens next. Aaron nodded quickly, mumbling something that sounded like agreement before hurrying to his car. As I watched him drive away, a sense of finality washed over me. Rachel's world was in shambles. Aaron's was crumbling. But there was one last piece left to set in motion. It was late, the kind of suffocating quiet that makes your ears ring. I stood in the living room, the weight of my decision crushing me like a lead blanket. Rachel was upstairs, blissfully unaware of the chaos I was about to unleash. For weeks, I had been collecting everything, screenshots of her conversations, photos from her hidden Instagram folder, and video footage from the cameras I had installed when she thought I was too blind to see. It wasn't enough to know. I wanted the truth to ruin her. Tonight, it all came to a head. I had sent a carefully crafted email to everyone who mattered in her life, her boss, her closest friends, even her parents. The subject line read, "The truth about Rachel." Attached were all the sordid details she had tried so hard to keep secret, her explicit photos, her messages to Aaron, and even a video of him leaving our home. Before hitting send, I hesitated, the cursor hovering over the button. Was this too far? Would the fallout hurt me more than it hurt her? But then I thought of the lies, the betrayal, and the smug way she had brought another man into our home while pretending to love me. The doubt evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. Click. The email was gone, a digital dagger slicing through her life. I sat back, waiting. It didn't take long. The first notification came from her phone upstairs. Then another. And another. The sound of her life unraveling echoed down the hall as she rushed out of the bedroom, clutching her phone, panic written all over her face. "John!" she shouted, her voice shaky. "Did you do this?" I looked at her, the calmest I'd felt in weeks. "You did this," I said, my voice low but steady. Her face crumpled as the realization hit her. "You sent them everything?" "Everything," I confirmed. "The photos, the messages, the videos. Everyone knows who you really are now, Rachel." She sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because you destroyed us," I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "You lied, you cheated, and you didn't even try to hide it. You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought I was too stupid, too trusting, too weak. Well, guess what? I'm not." She didn't respond, just sobbed into her hands, her phone still vibrating with notifications she couldn't bear to read. But I wasn't done. I stood up, grabbing my suitcase from the corner of the room. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. The divorce papers will be here tomorrow. You can stay in the house until it's sold. I don't want it anymore. You can keep the memories you made here, with him." Rachel looked up, her face a mess of tears and mascara. "John, please. I can fix this. I'll end it with Aaron. It's too late." I cut her off, my voice sharp. "You should have thought about that before you sent him those pictures. Before you invited him into our bed. Before you made a mockery of everything we built together." She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, the sight of her touch revolting. "There's one more thing," I said, turning toward the door. "Aaron? I sent him a copy of everything too. Let's see how long he sticks around now that the whole world knows who he is." With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove away, the weight on my chest began to lift. For the first time in months, I felt free. Rachel's cries echoed in my mind, but they no longer hurt. They were just noise fading into the background. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: Rachel's betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. And as for her? She'd have to live with the wreckage she created. Forever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit like and leave a comment with your favorite part. We'd love to hear your perspective.